Welcome to Series 3 of The Joy of Writing. I'm your host, Mark Carew, author of 3 novels, and someone who's interested in how other writers write, why they do it, and the fun or joy they get from their writing. In this episode, I talk with Lizzie Enfield about the slippery and nebulous subject of success. What is it? What counts as success to a writer? And are we ever satisfied by the success we've had? We also find out about an influential book from one of the greats of literature, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. Lizzie, the dictionary definition of success is the favourable outcome of something attempted, or the attainment of wealth, fame, etc. So what counts as success for you as a writer?
I think it's a completely movable feast. And I was thinking about this, and I think, it is that movable feastness is one of the things that, drives humans forwards, really, isn't it? Is we're never quite satisfied. So when I started, writing my first novel, all I wanted to achieve was to finish it, and I wasn't even thinking about publication or anything. I just thought, if I can finish this draft, it's quite a big challenge to write a whole book that appears like a book. And prior to that, I'd really sort of been writing 2,000 word articles at the most. Mm-hmm. Of course, when I finished it, I then wanted someone to buy it. Get a publishing deal. And then when I got my publishing deal, I wanted it to, be in the supermarkets. And that one was in the supermarkets. And then I wanted it to, and I partly wanted it to be in the supermarkets because when I started out writing, I had a colleague. I did a lot of freelance work at the Sunday Times at the time. And one of my colleagues there, who was much younger and much more successful, and he was sort of head of the section that I worked on at the time, and much younger, and then he'd written a book, and I went into Sainsbury's one day and his book was Sainsbury's Book of the Month, and it was like, Matt's book is Sainsbury's Book of the Month. And I came home and said to my husband, it's so annoying, his book is Book of the Month, and he just said, well, if you never finish your novel, it will never be anything. And so I was so cross with the two of them that I thought, right, I'm going to finish it. And then, so I wanted it to be published, wanted it to be in the supermarket, and then you want it to be a bestseller. Yeah. And then, that first book actually sold quite well, and then you want but it wasn't in the Sunday Times top 10, so then you want it to go from being a bestseller to being the Sunday Times top 10. And then you start readjusting, and then the ones after that. So I think it does, and that almost sounds a little bit arrogant, but I think it is human nature that no matter what you achieve, you step back and it's never quite enough. And actually part of the writing process is then to, have a chat to yourself and say, actually, this success is enough. This is success. So I suppose, there's almost a sort of curve of chasing it. And now I think, my 4th book out in the world I think, you always hope and you have those expectations, but then I've learned to apply a different meaning to success, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that is good reviews, and sometimes it is really just, and my last book, Ivy and Abe, had good reviews, and not just that, but it was read quite often, not all the time, but in the way that I wanted it to be read, which you must have experienced that same thing with your book of Alexander, which I've just read, but it is a book which is very much, there's sort of scope for perceiving it in different ways, getting it or not getting it, and that as a writer is quite hard, isn't it? Because you think, I want everyone to read it like this, and then you have to accept that they won't. So another sort of part of success is just people having read what you intended to write.
Yes, I would say, I think with all creative artists, what a writer is really hoping for is that people get them. Yeah. Get what they were aiming for, and that is a huge success when someone comes back to you and says, really enjoyed your book, and I enjoyed it for all these reasons, and you think, yes, great, you got it.
That's
And then
exactly
you're
it.
right. I mean, there's many ways to read a book, and people like other things, or maybe just don't get it. And
Well,
you have to.
also sometimes people will read a book and say to me, I read that and I thought, oh, I hadn't intended that, but I'm quite glad that you did take that from it.
Yeah.
So you don't have, but I think that is, you're right, that is, it's an element of success, of thinking if I've spoken to a handful of people only in the way that I intended to speak to them, there is some success in that. And it's always very hard to equate, isn't it? Sort of, you want commercial success because you want to retire and go and live by the sea and things like that. But actually, when you look at some of the enormous bestsellers, you think, would I have pride in, if I'd written, I won't name any actually, and there's a lot of really good, enormous bestsellers that I would have enormous pride if I'd written. But there are some that I would think, well, that's not, I wouldn't feel pride if I'd written that, or if I'd written something designed to be deliberately commercially appealing, or whatever it is. So I think it'd be false to say you don't hope that every book will sell millions, but then you take your success on the fact that that the books have been published, that there are many struggling writers out there, for whom that is enough. And I think really it is to, just to in some form get a novel out and to have it speak to someone should be enough. If you're trying to make a living out of it, it all becomes different. But I think, it is, as you say, it's a creative endeavour, and, you have to take that from it and sort of try and put the commercials aside.
Yeah, I don't think you can worry about the commercials too much, because that's so much out of your hands. And also on writing bestsellers, I don't think I could write many of the bestsellers. I just couldn't possibly do it. It's not me.
No, well, that's what I mean. It's you never know, do you? You never. I've got a friend who's constantly saying, the route to success is dying. So every time I go on a trip where I'm doing something a bit adventurous, he sort of rubs his hands and going, that's good, you might die, your book might sell really well. And I think, well, I don't know if that's the kind of success I want.
No, that's an interesting approach to it. I would say, just on the personal side, like a reader getting what you've written, and that's fantastic. For me, my own take on it, and I've been thinking about this a lot, is that it was at last finding something that was so completely me and so completely satisfying that was a real win to have got to that stage. This writing game ticks all the boxes, which doesn't include sales or income at the moment. Maybe it will later on, who knows? But at the moment, it's just, I'm so pleased to have managed it.
Yeah, and that's true, and it has to be your own. You wouldn't think about it if you've got your own personal satisfaction from it, that's success. If you've spoken to someone, on a level that you wanted to speak to them, that's a success. And if you've got enjoyment from the process, then, that's a success, isn't it? If you were, if you were looking at your life in terms of a success, you wouldn't be looking at money in the bank, really. You'd be looking at whether you lived it well. So I suppose it's that same equation, isn't it? Have you sort of lived your writing life well?
You start out with aims which are like, so I just want to get this thing published, and then that happens, and then you and then you go, now I want to earn a fortune from it and win a prize.
Yes, and also it changes as well. Sometimes you've got something very specific you want to say, sometimes you want to entertain people, sometimes you want to make them think a little, sometimes you want to be clever yourself. So it does move around and change a bit.
Often books are referred to by authors, especially the first books and even subsequent ones, like children. They're all as precious and unique and as wonderful as children. Especially, debut novelists often say this, and you're just immensely proud of them. So, is there anything there to be had from sort of an analogy to writing successful books? Like you've written the best book you can, and therefore you've done your job.
I have to be very careful because my middle daughter always says she's the least favourite child. So if I start sort of following that analogy and go, I didn't like the book in the middle, she'll go, oh, that proves it. And of course that's not true at all. But I almost think the opposite. So ditch the child analogy, because the middle daughter will then again go, yeah, that's definitely true. But I think that each novel, it feels like in the writing process you've learned something more as a writer, so there's something more in the next one. So I'm always most proud of the last one.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that about my children. or I must not say that publicly about my children. But I think that is part of the process, that it's just, and I'm maybe I'm very hard on myself. I'm still actually, my little sister just read my second novel. And in my mind I had more or less parked that, sort of thinking, oh, that was a long time ago, and she said, I really love this novel, and I thought, oh well, that's nice, it's I'd sort of forgotten about it, and just in my head. And I think that's often the case, isn't it? You go back to things that you haven't actually visited for a long time, you can go back and think, oh yeah, this is good actually, so I should probably reread some. But I think the writing process, I think I've become more confident and slightly more ambitious, and therefore I feel a slightly more sense of satisfaction with each novel as it goes off, but not when I'm writing it. When I'm writing it, I always think, this is awful, this is dreadful. So only when it gets to that point, when it's ready to come out into the world, do I feel that, yes, this is actually slightly better than the last. But I suppose that's what you're always striving to do, isn't it? And actually I feel really sorry for those authors who have, going back to this success, enormous success really early on.
Yeah.
Because if you enjoy writing and you like doing it, and that is what you want to do, and you want to keep doing it, I almost feel like you are working towards your big success, and to have it really early on is quite a then what do you do? And I've got a couple of friends who had quite considerable success with early novels, and then found it with their first novels actually, and then found their second novels almost faded away without a trace, because they couldn't cap that. And I often think that's about Mark Haddon. Not that he's not a brilliant writer, but his Curious Incident of a Dog in the Nighttime was such a unusual, phenomenal, good idea, well executed, brilliantly done, and a huge success. And I just thought, no matter what he comes up with after that, he will never top that success. And I've seen him speaking at literary festivals and heard him sort of, saying a little bit of, not, the same thing, not quite as openly as that, but, saying, somebody asked him, what does the success of that enable you to do? And he said, it enables me to give up on books if they're not working.
Right.
So it almost felt like he had in his head that, this is going to have to be better than that. And I know that, but obviously you get someone like Hilary Mantel who, came up with Wolf Hall and repeated that in the subsequent books. But I think it's, for some authors it's very, very hard. And Jessie Burton, who wrote The Miniaturist, actually she's talked very publicly about that. She said the success of The Miniaturist sort of floored her, and she actually got quite depressed and thought, I don't know what to do, I can't top that. And I think most writers are not, they're not super confident in their abilities. They are hard workers, because you have to be. And I think most people think, this isn't, I'm not quite there yet, I've got to work harder on it, and if I do that, it'll come there. And I think some people find that if they have that very early success, they just, it entirely floors them.
I've heard this many times actually, from writers saying that they fear they peak too early, and really all they're doing is just walking the gentle slope home. And
it's hard to peak really late when I'm dead.
But I was thinking, well, why can't you have two peaks? Like COVID. We can have multiple peaks along the way. It might not be cumulative and always get
And
that.
you do see authors again, and that is also true. So there's no, as a scientist, that's a good analogy, and you will know there's no sort of hard and fast rule. But I've actually got a friend in Brighton who had a very successful first novel, and then sort of one that did really that was excellent. Actually, I shouldn't say was a really good novel, but commercially didn't sell very many copies.
Yeah.
And then had another one that there was a lot of noise about, and now she's got one that I think is sort of poised to be stratospheric.
Wow.
So I think you can. You're right. You can sort of peak, and as you say, it's not to do with the book, it's to do with the market and the zeitgeist and how it's pitched and how it's sold and whether somebody picks it up and makes it into a film and all of those things. So all you can hope for in those circumstances is that they then go back to earlier books and think, this is also good. And you occasionally get those books like Stoner, can't remember who the author was, but somebody like Ian McEwan mentioned it, and that was suddenly, and I think the author had died by the time it was mentioned, and that was suddenly a huge new bestseller. So you can never really tell, or the plague, to go back to COVID.
Yes.
That there can be a time when, and obviously that was a successful book already, but it came out again, so you can never quite tell. And I think that's the nice thing about the books are almost like wine, that they're there in the cellar, and there is always that element of that one day they might mature and find a new or different market. You can't really tell.
Tastes change and opportunities change. That's for sure for books and everything. One of the things we're going to talk about as well is a writer who's influenced you in a book in particular. And now this is a very famous writer, Charles Dickens, who obviously is a success, but I know that even in his day he had his critics who looked at his writing, and well, I suppose you can look at any piece of writing and find flaws in it. But I think overall, Dickens must be one of the greats. So your book is Great Expectations. How is it so influential for you?
Well, it's one of my sort of earliest books. I had, I suppose, quite an unusual family setup at the time, maybe not in the 60s, but was that my dad used to read us bedtime stories rather than my mum. And I think that was quite unusual at the time. Men didn't have that much to do with their children, but his sort of prerequisite for that was that he didn't read us children's books. He read us whatever he wanted to read. So he sort of read Dickens and Conan Doyle, and I was brought up on the tales of Brigadier Gerard, who was a French legionnaire, and things like that. And Great Expectations was one of the ones that really stuck with me. And I think, my dad loved reading Dickens because, Dickens used to read them himself, and he was obviously a great storyteller, and very theatrical. And my dad was, I think, a bit of a sort of thwarted, he was a local government officer, but I think he'd had sort of thwarted amateur dramatist in him, and he liked doing all the voices and assuming all the characters. So I sort of have this, one of the first books I really clearly remember him reading me was Great Expectations. And I remember and I was probably about 5 at the time. And I remember being terrified by the convict who appears, at the very beginning of the book, and thinking all the time, not being able to sleep because I thought that there were convicts under my bed. And he would have to lie down on the floor after reading and say, I can't get under your bed. So a convict definitely wouldn't be able to, but I knew that they were quite malnourished and had to sort of come out of the marshes and grab young boys in order to steal food. But then I won a book token at some point, and there was a copy of Great Expectations that was a sort of red leather bound copy in the local bookshop, and I'd kind of set my sights on that as just a beautiful physical object. And when I won this book token, I bought that and then read it to myself, and I suppose I was quite young at the time, But I do think Dickens, for whatever his critics can level at him, and I still go back to him now. I reread David Copperfield recently. That's one of my favourite. He really just ticks all the boxes. I mean, I think his character creation, he sort of creates these very vivid, absolutely caught in the moment characters. There's no build to them. They're just there, fully formed and alive and vital. He's got a great sense of humour. He's a great storyteller. There's always a great story, and he has something to say. He is that social commentator. And I suppose, I started my working life as a journalist, and my third novel was probably, my biggest social commentary book. That was about the vaccination debate. So I felt like I had something to say with that novel. But I think Dickens just, partly because I was brought up on it. And the other thing about my parents, they didn't like contemporary novels at all. So once we'd read Great Expectations, it was Bleak House, and then it was Pickwick Papers. So I had quite a lot of Dickens, and not much else. But also, it just stands the test of time. It's so it is that sort of, characters who appeal to you throughout any age, really. They're very much of their time, but they have a lot of contemporary resonance, and also he's very funny, I think, and very descriptive. So I'm waxing very lyrical. It's those very evocative settings and these very humorous characters and situations, but at the same time, really holding a mirror up to Victorian society and leaving that legacy.
So you mentioned social commentary in your novel about vaccines. Any other ways that you can see a sort of residue of Dickens' influence in your own work?
I don't know if I dare say that. I mean, I suppose, I don't know if that's, no, it's not it's a residue of that influence.
The influence,
is, I try to sort of inject humour into my novels. So I suppose there is that, trying to say something, but not to make it a polemic, but say it in an interesting and hopefully entertaining way. There's a residue of the storytelling, I suppose. I mean, I think that's one of the things that, Dickens was so clearly just full of things that he wanted to say and get them out as stories. And I have actually got an idea for a novel about Dickens's wife, but I won't say too much about that.
What about the idea you mentioned where his characters just suddenly turn up in a room and they're fully fleshed and fully realised? They don't need gentle introduction, they're just bang, there they are.
I think that doesn't happen to me, and I've heard other authors like Elizabeth Strout saying of Oliver Kitteridge, she just pitched up and there she was. But I think that, that happens on the page, so I don't think that doesn't happen to me when I'm writing. I have to think about them quite a lot.
Yeah.
But it's that way that he presents them, and I'm sure that was, Dickens's method as well. It's that way that he presents them. The other thing that has influenced me definitely, but this is not so much his work, is his routine. But he used to walk a lot, up to 20 miles a day.
Wow.
Around London and Kent, and sort of taking in the locations and looking at the characters. And that is actually part of my writing method, is to sort of sit down and write for a bit and then to go for a walk and think it and let the things grow in my head while I'm doing that. So I suppose I've taken a bit of his method, and that's always when I meet people and they kind of go having a nice walk and I think, no, I'm working.
That's right. And why are you staring at me?
Yes.
You think I'm going to be another character?
Myself. Yes.
So walking is always good advice. It takes you out of yourself to some extent. And I know, for example, Charles Darwin, he was a great fan of walks, and he had some success as well.
Writers. I mean, I sort of looked at that into a bit when I was talking about routine in your book, but a lot of writers, sort of some form of physical exercise is part of their writing day. And Murakami used to run, Kurt Vonnegut used to swim, which I also do. And but they all describe that as very much, a part of the process, because it's where they're, letting thoughts sort of grow. It's a space in which, or the time and space in which they're letting thoughts sort of grow and develop. But also, I think it's Vonnegut said, you actually sort of need to be quite physically fit to write, which you don't really think of. You just think you're sitting on a chair. But I suppose it's like anything, it helps with mental alertness if you're sort of physically quite active and fit as well. But
you're right, though. I mean, you have to keep healthy. You have to. I mean, it's a mental sport, I suppose, writing, to some extent. I got a lovely quote, I think, from Simone de Beauvoir, which is, "We seek to create the exact reproduction of something that doesn't exist."
Yes.
So you need to, be on your best game to be able to do that.
Yes, and I suppose that it's a good analogy. I mean, it's a sport for the brain, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you need to be fit to make that happen.
Absolutely. Well, great stuff. Thank you for helping me discuss and think about success, because you can get caught up in all the promotion, the marketing, and everybody else seems to be selling hundreds of books or millions of books or whatever, but that's not really the point, is it?
No, and at this point, I will allow you your child's analogy.
Thank you.
because it is. I just didn't want to favour one. I didn't want to get trapped favouring one over the other. But I think it is that you do the best you can, don't you? As a parent, you always feel that you are failing in certain areas, or certainly, but then there comes a point when you think, actually, you've done the best, that you can, and you've put your all into it.
Yeah.
And if it turns out, a reasonable human being, they don't have to be, running the country, which God help us, or, they don't have to be Einstein. It just can be something that contributes to life in some ways. And I suppose that's what you want from your children. You want them to sort of contribute to the world in, whatever way. And I think that's what you want with a book. You think, I want to have added something other than more paper to be pulped.
Right.
If that's, even if that's just one person, which I had a really lovely email from a woman who worked in a charity shop in Portsmouth after Ivy and Abe came out, and she said, I've just finished reading your book, it spoke to me on so many levels, and I feel like I'm thinking about my life differently now. And I thought, that to me was the success, was sort of wound up in that, the success of that book was that email. And you think, even if that's just one person, it's not going into Waterstones and seeing it on the shelves. It's one person saying it spoke to me and it's made me think differently. And then you think, okay, I have contributed something. It's not just all because so much of success can almost be a vanity project. If you're talking about it in terms of sales, that's all for you, and it's stepping back from it, isn't it, and going, a lot of it obviously has to be for yourself because you're putting a lot of time and effort into it. But the other side of that is, what does anyone else? What am I giving in this?
I think hopefully this will be of some use and inspiration to writers and why bother to write in the first place and what you can expect from it. It's been wonderful talking over 3 episodes with you, Lizzie. I've learned a lot and wish you all the best and more success with your books.
Well, you too, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. After recording this episode, Lizzie formulated a rather nice summary to the aim of a writer. You should try and get as much out of your writing as you get out of the writing of others. In the next episode, I will be talking with Tyler Keevil and discussing his latest book, a thriller called Your Still Beating Heart. You can leave feedback on any of the episodes at podchaser.com/The Joy of Writing, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.